The mess hall doors were supposed to open for everyone. That was the rule, painted right there on the sign, but rules bend easily when the wrong hand is holding the gate. Sergeant First Class Elena Yefremova stood frozen, a tray balanced between trembling fingers, while a military policeman's palm hovered inches from her face like a wall made of flesh and command. Behind her, a hallway of soldiers had gone utterly silent, waiting to see if she would fight or fold. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Elena had flown in that morning from a forward posting nobody back home could pronounce. She'd spent 14 months in dust and silence, in places where a hot meal was a memory you rationed like ammunition. She hadn't asked for recognition. She hadn't asked for anything, really, just a seat, a plate, 5 quiet minutes to remember what normal felt like. But normal, it seemed, required permission she didn't have. New policy, the MP said, jaw tight, eyes refusing to soften. Officers overflow reservation. You'll have to wait outside. It wasn't true. Elena knew it wasn't true. She'd eaten in 100 mess halls on 100 different bases, and never once had a private soldier been told her uniform wasn't uniform enough. But she also knew what happened to soldiers who argued with men holding clipboards and unspoken authority. So she stood there, tray growing heavier by the second, humiliation crawling up the back of her neck like heat from an old wound. Somewhere behind the MP's shoulder, dust drifted lazy and golden through a shaft of fluorescent light. A radio crackled faintly near the kitchen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room held its breath the way rooms do right before something breaks. That was when the voice came, low, unhurried, carrying the kind of weight that silences even silence itself. Sergeant. Every head turned. At a corner table sat a man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons that told stories most people in that room would never survive to imagine. Rear Admiral Thomas Anderson had been quietly finishing his dinner, steak untouched, water sweating in its glass, watching the scene unfold with the stillness of a man who'd seen injustice before and had learned exactly how loud silence could scream. He rose, slowly, deliberately, and in that motion, 30 years of command straightened his spine. Is there a problem here? Anderson asked, though his tone made clear he already knew the answer. He simply wanted to hear the MP say it out loud, wanted to watch the lie shrink under its own weight. The MP hesitated. He thought he'd never have to explain himself to an admiral over a mess hall doorway. He was wrong. Sir, there's a reservation policy for soldiers who've earned their dinner? Anderson's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because if that's the policy, half this room should be standing outside with her. A murmur rippled through the crowd, soft at first, then swelling, the way a current builds before it becomes a tide. Somewhere near the serving line, someone whispered her name. Airborne Patch. Silver Wings. They'd heard about her convoy, the one that hit contact outside the wire, the one she didn't run from. Elena felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected anyone to remember. She hadn't expected anyone to care. Anderson crossed the room without another word, closing the distance between rank and decency in 6 unhurried steps. He reached out his hand, not to salute, not to command, but simply to take her tray, the universal gesture of a man saying, "You belong here, and I'll prove it myself." "Sit with me," he said. "I could use the company." For one suspended heartbeat, Elena hesitated. Accepting felt like defiance. Refusing felt like surrender. She thought of every time she'd swallowed her pride to keep the peace, every silence she'd mistaken for strength. She was tired of choosing quiet. She sat. The room exhaled. Somewhere behind them, a young private clapped once, hesitant, testing the air, and then the applause caught like dry grass in wind, spreading table to table until the mess hall rang with something that felt, for the first time all evening, like justice finding its footing. The MP stood alone at the door, hand lowering, authority deflating like a punctured tire. He'd mistaken policy for power, and power, it turned out, answered to something older and sturdier, decency, worn like a uniform that never goes out of style. Anderson didn't lecture him. He didn't need to. He simply looked at the young MP, not with anger, but something closer to disappointment, the kind of father gives a son who's forgotten what the uniform is actually for. Rules exist to protect people, Anderson said quietly, not to keep them out. Across the table, Elena finally ate, slowly, savoring, the way you eat a meal you weren't sure you'd get. And somewhere between the potatoes and the quiet gratitude in her chest, she realized something she'd carry long after this deployment ended. Dignity isn't given by rank. It's given by people willing to stand up when standing up costs them nothing but their comfort. Because kindness doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back, sometimes in the shape of a stranger's outstretched hand across a crowded room. And somewhere in that mess hall, under fluorescent light and the golden drift of dust, a soldier who almost wasn't allowed to sit down finally understood. The door was never really the problem. It was who was willing to hold it open. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever watched someone stand up for a stranger when it mattered most? Share this with someone who needs a reminder that decency still exists, and subscribe for more stories where courage shows up exactly when it's needed.